Welcome everyone to our PETRAS report launch this fine morning. Our report is on future challenges of IoT cybersecurity in the UK industry sectors. And this is us marking a milestone in our ongoing campaign to strengthen PETRAS engagement and collaboration with industry. We've got a action-packed hour for you ahead. So firstly, I'd like to welcome our panelists and attendees. Thank you very much for coming to join us today. Just to remind everyone that the meeting is recorded and that there will be a Q&A session after the panel discussion. And we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. And indeed, if we might have to resort to email after for maybe some answers. So be aware of that. Today's agenda will begin with introductions to set a sort of backdrop to the whole report. And we'll discuss why we are interested in our industry-specific workshops and why these were held and what sectors were covered and who participated, etc. And more details about these industry workshops will be given in a brief summary of the major findings and recommendations covered shortly by Gideon Ugune, who is our Senior Research Fellow and Synthesis Fellow in PETRAS. A copy of this full report will be available on the PETRAS website, and also after this session we will get emails out which will contain that report as well, so you can actually read it at your leisure. So following our overview from Gideon, then we look forward to introducing you to our panelists. As you've seen from their bios, we have assembled an exceptional panel. We've one slight schedule change due to illness. Matilda Rowe from the British Standards Institute won't be able to make it today, I'm afraid. However, each member that we do have here have extensive knowledge covering different fields. For example, we have diverse perspectives coming from different company sizes, industry sectors, and connection to the world of IoT and cybersecurity. We also have representation from SMEs who provide cybersecurity solutions to a wide range of customers, a world-leading company with a massive legacy in pushing innovation for decades, and one of the world's largest energy producers that's already expanding beyond oil and gas. So it's truly a pleasure to welcome them all and to look forward to hearing their views in a lively discussion shortly. Please do take part in the conversation and make sure you submit your questions via the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, or at the top of the screen actually. To conclude, we'll close the webinar with Jeremy Watson, who is our director, and who will wrap up the discussion with and reflect some of PETRAS's achievements to date and, more excitingly, future plans. My name is Julie McCann. I'm the Deputy Director of PETRAS. I haven't introduced myself, typical me. And without any further ado, let's go to the overview from Gideon. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Julie, for the introduction. And I'm excited today to present the findings and recommendations of the PETRAS synthesis report on our industry-specific workshops on the future challenges of IoT cybersecurity in the UK industry sectors, and to set the stage for the panel discussion that follows. To provide some context to my presentation, I want to start by saying that IoT cybersecurity is an increasingly important issue in the UK. This is because UK has become home to a rapidly growing community of companies developing and commercializing IoT component technologies, products and services, which are already having a significant impact on businesses in homes and on individuals. A report by Statista, which have been monitoring the global IoT market, suggests that UK takes the lead in Europe when it comes to the growth of the IoT market size. According to them, revenue in the IoT market is projected to reach $25.95 billion in 2023. However, the growth of IoT in the UK has been accompanied by increasing concerns about cybersecurity and privacy. The big question, therefore, is whether UK organizations are ready to meet the cybersecurity needs of citizens and businesses when IoT technology is deployed in consumer and business context. DCIT Cybersecurity Breaches Survey of 2023 suggests that only 37% of small businesses in the UK have a formal cybersecurity strategy, and this number increases to about 49% for medium businesses. So in response to the need to better understand user requirements and concerns about IoT technology and to identify knowledge gaps that could drive research, PETRAS, National Center of Excellence for IoT Cybersecurity, organized a series of 7 very successful industry workshops. And the global objectives of these workshops were to reflect on the ongoing research and the state of the art in IoT and cybersecurity, and to identify emerging challenges and explore priorities for future research, and also to connect with key players in the sectors to gain a more comprehensive insight. And these workshops bring together academics, industry representatives, and representations from public institutions to discuss the challenges to the integration of IoT-based solutions in the UK industry sectors, and how academic industrial collaboration, research collaboration can help in addressing these challenges. So the scope of our conversation specifically focused on not only on the technical challenges that are related to the security and privacy of IoT, but also on the challenges that are related to existing standards and regulations, and the roles of diverse stakeholders that are involved in the ecosystem. And we also discussed existing PETRAS research on the subject matter and what should be the strategic research agenda for the future. The points in that in both phases are more, we dwell more on those points in the discussions and also in the reports that you are going to read. Now to our findings. First and foremost, I want to say that the workshops brought forth a range of findings and recommendations in each of the sectors that we considered, but I've picked a number of them that I think are generic across different sectors for this presentation. First, there is a clear unanimity that IoT drives rapid growth in several UK industries. For example, findings from our workshop in financial services reveal that IoT is an essential technology for data collection and management to improve environmental, social, and governance practices. And IoT enhances interoperability of technologies within the sector. Secondly, we discussed how different industries are confronted with different obstacles to unlocking the massive potential of the IoT ecosystem. And top on the list of these obstacles are security and privacy risks that are associated with the deployment of IoT technology. And we also, thirdly, why the participants agree that the existing cybersecurity regulations and policy and guidelines, as the case may be, in the UK, such as the National Cyber Strategy 2022 and Government Cyber Strategy 2022 to 2023, lie at the core of efforts to insulate the public and private sectors of the UK from cyber threats. They suggest that these regulations are often hard to implement, and also there are concerns about trust around data sharing, awareness and understanding of security and privacy risk, and these are considered major research issues. I'll quickly go into our recommendations. Let me also state that, we brought forth a range of recommendations, most of which are policy recommendations on how to address the challenges of IoT. And I've also picked a number of them that I think are generic and for across different sectors. The first one here is that the government should establish a cross-sectoral regulatory framework for knowledge sharing and communication on the forthcoming impacts of IoT. And this is important for sharing best practices among stakeholders, and also to balance the tension among them. And was also recommended that existing IoT cybersecurity policy standards and regulation guidelines, as the case may be, must be complemented with domain-specific guidelines that address threats in various sectors and industry. It was also recommended that academia plays an important role in generating evidence for policy making, and a center such as ours should be adequately resourced to act at a platform for stakeholders in industry, in academia, civil society, organizations, and the public to engage. And given the nature of the heterogeneous, nature of IoT ecosystem, it was suggested that UK government should take the lead in setting up collaboration with strategic countries to co-create IoT cybersecurity policies and regulation and guidelines that can cut across different jurisdictions. And I quickly go into the discussion, into the conclusions. So this report that you are about to read set out a comprehensive set of recommendations for IoT cybersecurity regulation and governance, which we will continue to develop. And I want to say that this event today allows us the opportunity to get the perspectives of our panelists and everyone on the different findings and recommendations of the report. And we are open to receiving your questions and your suggestions after the event. You can send it to us through our email. We're happy to present these findings and recommendations at policy roundtables and briefing. Please contact us, PETRAS at ucl.ac.uk if you have any comments or suggestion, either during this event, online briefing, or after. And then I'll go back to Julie for the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gideon. It's a lovely piece of work. Thank you very much for presenting it in summary there. Okay, so now it gives me great pleasure to pass over to our panelists. We have Paula Livingston from BP, Ian Gardner from IBM, and Evan Jones from Complete Cyber with us today. As I said earlier, Matilda had to pull out due to illness, and we wish her the best. Okay, so for each of our panelists, what I'm going to ask you to do is give a brief introduction to yourself and what you do, and then give us an idea of your biggest challenge that's facing your particular sector, or as you see it, for us as a country or our society. And we'll start off with you, Paula.
Thanks, Julie. Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
Yes, lovely and clear.
Yeah, and thanks, Gideon, as well, for that introduction to the document. That was a great document. I had a look at it before. So yeah, my name is Paula Livingstone. I'm a cybersecurity risk officer for BP. I'm a member of a team of 4 specialising in industrial cybersecurity, and between the 4 of us, we cover the whole globe in terms of BP's operations. My focal area within that realm is the North Sea. We've got quite a lot of assets out offshore in the North Sea and off the west of Shetland as well. The Caspian Sea, which is one of our core regions. We've got about 10 or 11 assets there, both offshore and onshore. I was recently on a trip to the Caspian last month, actually. I went offshore, and it was quite interesting to see all of the solutions actually in place, thankfully. We also cover lubricants. My realm in that world is the Eastern Hemisphere, so I've got lubricants plants across, as far afield as China, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, and so on. Asia, LNG. We've got an LNG plant in Asia, right on West Papua, which is looks like a really cool place. I look forward to going there sometime, perhaps. Sustainable aviation fuels in Australia is one of our newer activities that we're bringing in now. We've got projects where we're developing effectively refitting refineries to become sustainable aviation fuel plants. And carbon capture Indonesia has just been thrust into my plate. So that'll be another interesting one for the future as well. I also live partially in the academic world. I'm completing a dissertation for an MSc in cybersecurity. So looking at machine-to-machine identity, supply chain challenges, and blockchain as well. Now, the biggest challenge, I guess For me, in the industrial world, it's legacy system vulnerability. And if we look at those in the way that they support IoT, that's a real challenge. I think we're dealing with systems that are perhaps going out of date, becoming obsolete. And again, we need to tighten up on that. Interconnectivity, that's always a challenge for industrial cyber. We've got everyone trying to connect everything, and we're trying to stop them from connecting everything. So it's a bit of a tension there. Again, operational continuity. We have had situations where things like supply chain problems have brought our operations to a halt temporarily. So, these are things that come at us from left field. And I think I'll just say one more before I run out of time. The emerging threat landscape. We've got AI, and we've got all sorts of different things coming down the track at us, and we're going to have to adapt to that as well. So yeah, that's me. Hi, everyone.
Marvellous. Thank you, Paula. Now over to Ian. Same question.
Hi, everybody. My name's Ian Gardner. I work for IBM, a technology company rather than industry, like BP. But my role in IBM is as a account technical leader, and that role is there to advise organizations on their strategy going forward. I have worked in many industries, and I cover many industries as well as manufacturing. I've been involved in Industry 4 type projects for the last, I don't know, getting towards 9 years now. But my background's in consulting, a lot of heavy stuff around the big complex projects. Currently I work with a number of clients across sectors. That includes retail, manufacturing industry, and pharma. The thing for me about cybersecurity is that, we're talking data here. That's the big thing. And particularly when we look at industry, there's a massive opportunity there that Industry 4 offers. I think Paula mentioned where everybody's trying to connect things, but at the same time, when we look at the security aspects of it, there's a fear there around connecting devices, legacy machines, etc. And I get that, but at the same time, we've not got to forget about the opportunities that are presented through this. It's complicated for industry, manufacturing in particular, because of the legacy machines, etc. But we just need to be mindful of the risks that of connecting machines, etc., and digitalization of factories and sites, etc. But that's me. I'll pass over to someone else.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian. Ivan, over to you.
Morning. You can hear me okay?
Yes, lovely and clear.
Perfect. Hi, my name's Evan. So I guess the only thing I sort of try and brand myself as a security architect. So I'm very much like to get in there quite technically in sort of looking at solutions and making sure that they're kind of secure by design and principles are in place. I currently look after Complete Cyber, so we're an SME team of about 12 people at the moment, and we cover both sort of IT/OT systems really. So in the IT domain, we're very much focused on sort of e-commerce and finance, insurance sectors. Looking at the kind of a lot of the cloud infrastructure. So very much kind of what I call modern pace of where both IT and cyber kind of meet quite hand in hand. Don't necessarily always get it right, but that's kind of where we are. And then obviously in the OT domain, we particularly cover a lot on sort of transportation, where again, sort of picking up on what you said, Paula, you've got a lot of legacy infrastructure. I mean, stuff from like the 60s is still present and operating today that keeps our infrastructure working. So yeah, we cover quite a lot in both kind of consultative advisory, kind of solutions development, so sort of turnkey kind of based approaches. And we're also sort of just recently through Innovate UK actually just started to move into sort of the product domain now. So moving away from sort of just the professional services into kind of offering developing bespoke products where we feel the future is going to. In terms of kind of future aspects where we often see the kind of issues at the moment, sort of picking up again on that legacy infrastructure is a key concern, because quite a lot of these systems are sort of operationally high availability and safety critical. So trying to kind of protect that as the forefront. Cyber's kind of there at sort of number 2 or 3 in that kind of prioritization list. Obviously digitalization, so particularly in transportation, we've seen quite a massive increase in kind of this warp to sort of digitalize everything, you know, get everything kind of out, data's big, get it in the cloud, for example, which is all great, and I'm all for it actually, because it offers a lot of insight that we didn't previously have. The problem with that is there's this kind of awareness lack with addressing cybersecurity as being a key concern. So I'm all for it, and I want it to go down that route as well. But I think the problem is a lot of people disregard, or they just, it's not even kind of the judgment of, oh, I need to think about the security of this system and how I get data from A to B and how do I protect it and so forth. I think that's an aspect that is really kind of a key concern for us and what we're seeing. And then probably just finally one, which is a bit of a future one that I think we'll see now, is particularly in IoT sites where we've got a lot of big data sort of moving around, or we've got the potential mesh of large amounts of sensors and devices communicating. A lot of those sensors and devices tend to be within our own jurisdiction, i.e. in our home with smart tech, or in the cars, or in our vehicles that we use, you know, the systems that we rely upon in healthcare, for example. So there's a kind of infringement of that kind of data privacy. So how do you sort of offer security solutions that give us the protection and identification of those systems whilst also respecting that privacy aspect? So I think that's a key area that will become a future problem.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's
it from me. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so my first question is to Ian. So we can see that IoT innovation is moving at a rapid pace, and the private sector is at the forefront of cybersecurity skills requirements. Whilst according to the government cybersecurity strategy report, which quotes is basically saying that the government struggles to compete with the private sector to attract and retain the required cadre of device skilled cybersecurity professionals, despite its positive efforts to date. So, Ian, how can industry strike that balance between pushing the boundaries of technological advancements in IoT and ensuring robust cybersecurity measures?
You've got to have a think about what actually has the biggest impact on security, etc. One thing I think Evan touched on it, and that was in building those security requirements. So now we're not talking DevOps, we're talking DevSecOps, right, which is embedding security into every step of what we do. It's difficult with IoT because we like when you look at the average manufacturer, what's their company size? Probably 100 employees. Where do they get their skills from? So yeah, you might say that private sector's got a lot of skills. In manufacturing, it's probably not the case. And you look at the target areas as to what organizations are targeted most. It tends to be finance, number one, for obvious reasons. And then I think on 2, it kind of fits into healthcare. Or if I got those the wrong way around, actually, healthcare 1 and finance 2. But it's the big data-centric organizations. The bigger the organization, the bigger the target. The bits that make the biggest impact onto resiliency for organizations tend to be introducing DevSecOps, that approach of looking at security to everything. So don't just connect things on until you've thought about what the impact might be. Like I said, they do offer lots of opportunities. Doesn't mean that. I think it's probably as bad not to do anything. That's what a lot of smaller organizations do because they don't know where to go, yeah, or they'll take that naive approach and do something where they'll get kind of hurt from that. Training's a big thing, a massive thing that has a big impact on organizations. But what I also would say is that AI is making a big impact on this. So when we talk about lack of skills, lack of people, introducing AI type detection systems or even assessments to augment what skilled resources we've got can have an impact where it can increase the skills, it can increase the capabilities of what your organization's got. So, you know, more and more security tools capabilities include AI, and that can help out. I mean, the list is endless, to be honest, but I'd always think, well, you know, what does it mean? I'm not saying don't do anything. I think you should take that zero trust approach. Assume that you've already been hacked or something else bad has happened. I think the average is that it's about 300 days before you actually know that you've been hacked, which is not good. And when you do find out, it usually comes from third parties. So build in that kind of zero trust approach, and think about the consequences of just plugging something in.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's more complicated as well. Just one other thing,
Yeah.
with the hybrid cloud, which most people have, that adds extra complexities as well, because the data tends to be in multiple places.
Exactly. Yes, indeed. And those multiple places are growing. So who would you say is ultimately responsible for cybersecurity within government and industry? And what's your thoughts around a private sort of public partnership?
Who's that one to?
Sorry, Ian, it's still with you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think it's responsibility of everybody. You know, let's face it. It doesn't take, when you think of the silly breaches where people have been plugging USB sticks into things, we're all told not to do that. Not all machines are locked down, and yeah, it's difficult. Public-private partnerships, why not? You know, we have to do something, because I know that for some public departments, it's difficult for them to get skills, be it because of you know, better incentives in the private sector, or just location. But we have to think about how we deal with this. There have to be, you know, standards are increasing and getting better, but it's a cat and mouse game, isn't it, in the world of security? But we have to, organizations need to rely on each other. We have to be a bit more open to a point. I don't know, it's difficult because nobody likes talking about security and what their security levels are. So that is a challenge in itself.
Very interesting, thank you. My next question is to Paula. So we have key industry sectors, including critical national infrastructure organizations, are very much dependent on digital technologies that we now are struggling to secure. We're more connected now than we've ever been, and this creates an unimaginable attack surface against which our adversaries can seek value. The UK is the third most targeted country in the world for cyber attacks after the US and Ukraine. So, Paula, what would you say are your top cyber threats and trends that face the UK industry sectors, and how are they positioned to address them?
Well, I think, as you say, the critical national infrastructure is becoming more and more of a focus for us now. And I can speak directly to that. I personally have just completed the NISR CAF procedure, which is the new government procedure to directly assess what we're doing as an organisation that operates critical national infrastructure. And it is a program that's evolving quite quickly. I last did that in 2019, and it's emerging and becoming quite a robust and strong framework that's going to produce the goods, I think, down the line. Now, the top cyber threats, I think, well, you know, it's the old favourites. I think we're going back to here: ransomware and phishing. I think it's always going to figure in the top three until we somehow manage to solve that. Maybe AI will help us. I mean, AI is going to be the great white hope down all of this list, because we're going to start thinking, can we use it to fix this? Can we use it to fix that? But definitely ransomware and phishing, and that's one of these vectors where, you know, there is a large component of people rather than systems, and therefore, you know, we've got to think outside the box in that sense, because it's not all about writing some code and you know, creating a thing that will just block it. We can't stop it. We have to teach people. In the context of this meeting, IoT device security is definitely a high priority for us in the industrial world. IIoT, I guess we call it, but it's you know, it's just another name for the same thing. there are a constant increasing number of IoT devices that we're finding across our estates. And there are concerns. I'm sure we're going to talk about that. And Gideon, has detailed many of those concerns. But things like operating system security, the robustness of memory management, reliance on the cloud. For us in the industrial world, we cannot necessarily connect to the cloud at will. We have to have segregation, and if systems are reliant on a permanent connection to the cloud, then that creates a challenge for us. Supply chain, that's another thing. I think we're finding nowadays we've got so much open source code. Open source code sits almost fundamentally at the base of every development tree. We'll find that we've got things like this J4S thing that was built into everything, and it was effectively, when you looked across the scope of where the supply chain had got that in, almost everyone had been using it. Cloud security, again, that's hand in hand with IoT. I think, Julie, the IoT environment and the cloud environment kind of need each other, and therefore, as the reliance we have on the cloud grows, we need to think up new ways to secure these environments. Back to people, I guess, insider threats can be a problem too. That's one of these ever-present ones that's not going to go away. And it's a massive risk, I think, for many organizations. I think, we spoke about AI all through this, and I think that's one of the places where AI can help, because it can detect anomalous patterns of activity from what people are doing. And therefore, nobody likes to feel like they've got Big Brother looking over their shoulder all the time, but I think that it becomes more and more necessary if you're going to have some effective, robust way of at least doing something about insider threats.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, so let's see.
Yeah, it is very interesting that you bring up, both have brought up the conversation around AI protecting, but also that some of the problems are human-oriented problems, or it's coming in, the attack is coming in from the manipulation of humans. So it'd be interesting to hear more about how AI could help in that particular situation. It's not just a case of looking for anomalies in code or anomalies in data. It's human behavior. Very interesting. Okay, so my next question is over to Evan. My question to you is around a collaborative challenge that requires some of the main recommendations of PETRAS' report was that the government could establish a cross-sectoral regulatory framework for knowledge sharing and communications between sectors on the forthcoming impacts of IoT. So my question to you, Evan, is how can different sectors and industries enhance information sharing and collaboration to collectively strengthen the overall cybersecurity posture of IoT?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've already got certain elements of that in play. Obviously, PETRAS is a an academia group that kind of has a role there to play at the table. I think there's some government recognition that it does need to be cross-industry collaboration. I mean, thinking about it, you've got the National Cybersecurity Centre that's really there to kind of lay the kind of foundations and a framework to put that together. We used to, and we still do actually, we have like a CPNI type framework for CNI, or critical national infrastructure equivalent, that's managed and absorbed into National Cybersecurity Centre. But I think the gap at the moment is where you then consider sort of the IoT component aspect of it, because it's new and emerging and novel. That kind of industry hasn't really got a place, or hasn't quite got a kind of seat at the table with the kind of CNI sector. But then also there'll be certain parts of IoT that will be non-related to CNI as well. So it's kind of, how do you sort of bridge that? I think the other challenge as well is when you look at sort of the public-private kind of discussions and relationships, so like their cross-sector partnerships. I think the issue at the moment that we're going to see is with sort of IP and reputational damage. So if you're looking at the OEMs or the manufacturers or the system integrators in our industry, it's about kind of, if we're a company and I build something and I want to sell it to customers or so forth, I don't necessarily want to show you the IP, the underlying software code or the OS configuration of my device because it's my proprietary IP. But at the same time, we're going to need to share information about that device because it's a contributing factor to the overall attack surface. So there's that balance about how do we do that. And I think that's where we're going to start to sort of look at potentially sort of building up an exchange or a consortium where we have an ability to kind of look at things like blockchain as an example, where we can look at ways of sharing data that protects my IP, but provides some contextualized information that can be used as part of threat intelligence or security monitoring, as an example. I think that's an interesting area that will definitely become a feature. And I think, Paul, you mentioned it on your paper at the moment you're looking into. I think that's an area that could help, a lot of the industry at the moment. I think the other part to it as well is looking at sort of like industry, like cross-industry exercises as well. So obviously certain civil service and sort of government-based departments have to undertake kind of like instant scenarios and look at different kind of playbooks about, what happens if this happens and, how do we sort of react to it in that sense. The problem is it's all quite siloed, and I think we do that also in the private sector as well. So there kind of needs to be this kind of governance/national cybersecurity centre, kind of almost like a paid kind of exercise where we start to look at, well, what happens if, an IoT manufacturer that provides a lot of systems support and technology into the healthcare, because obviously that becomes a supply chain incident and that could affect healthcare. It could affect, like we saw, a good few years ago with the OS ransomware. A situation like that is kind of looking at those scenarios where you've got a private sector that's building stuff, providing it into healthcare, and then obviously it could shut down healthcare. So that's an incident we need to be looking into, and that needs to be funded so that we can understand how we deal with it and how we cross collaborate between the different parties involved. And there's millions of use cases around that, looking at things like manufacturing, automotive industry, transportation in that sense. So there's lots of things around that. I think we definitely need to look into it. I think having an open sort of review mechanism between the different industries, having a way to sort of allow anyone from an SME up to a very big kind of, blue chip company, as well as the civil service, the government departments, possibly not the military, because they do tend to quite sort of segregate themselves for obvious reasons, but having a platform where there is the ability to sort of share information or good advice and so forth, I think is there. There are lots of examples of that, but I think they happen at a more local level rather than at a national level. And again, PETRAS is a good place for that to kind of bridge that gap as well. But it does require a bit of governance or like a sort of government framework to kind of put that in place from a sort of roadmap strategy sort of perspective. I think that's not quite there at the moment, and given where the UK is from a sort of IoT kind of perspective, I think that should definitely be a core principle of where we're moving to things as well. And I think, yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. If I was to sort of summarize where I think, the collaborative efforts between cross-industry sort of areas needs to be looked into.
Yeah. And do you think academia has a role in this as well?
Oh, totally not. No, forget academic. No, joking. Yeah, totally ruined the call if I said that. No, absolutely. I think the element of where academia comes into it is it kind of gives you this. When you think about public-private, their objectives are quite similar, which is either to run a service or to build something to offer as a service in that sense. It's kind of the business motto. When you think about academia, although it's a similar concept, there's an ability to sort of almost have this sort of blowout aspect to say, well, actually, we want to look down this direction, but we just don't have the time or the necessary skill set resources to go and look into this particular problem or this challenge statement. So academia can definitely support that aspect of it as well, and also look at sort of providing sort of a kind of unified sort of diverse kind of approach to looking at things holistically. I think when you're working to objectives, which you probably might do in public and private sector, your mind's quite clouded with the purpose of your role and your job and the company strategy and so forth. With academia, you've got the opportunity to think quite laterally, if you want, as laterally as you want to be, really. So I think having that kind of horizontal and vertical plane of academia with public-private sector will definitely work, because it will kind of offer some insights into how we address some of those problem statements. And I mentioned as well, like, how do you share security information or context information or threat intelligence and so forth. that requires technology that doesn't, well, it kind of does exist, but it needs to be more unified and kind of developed so that it becomes more of a kind of standalone platform that everyone can sort of use. And that's an opportunity where academia would come in and look into that and develop concepts that, you know, industry could take away and to develop further for commercialization. So yeah, definitely, I'd say academia definitely plays a huge role in all of this, really.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we didn't have Matilda in today, and Matilda's from the British Standards Institute. So this is to anybody of our panelists around standards. Where do you see the standards being developed to help any of your particular industries, and in particular, how would they affect the more socio-technical side of the equation? Maybe start with you, Ian.
I mean, it plays a massive part because yeah, you need, that would be an acceptable level. The challenge is that it's a big space. So how would you get those standards to cover all areas? Probably not, but probably multiple layers of standards. IoT devices. You know, when we're talking about electrical safety and what have you, we tend to have, you know, coloured boxes and what have you that specify that meet a certain level of standard. But when it's a Raspberry Pi stuck onto something, which, you know, let's face it, it exists. How do you know that's reached a certain level of standard?
Yeah.
I think it's a really complicated area. There's so many layers to the onion.
Yeah, exactly. Paula. Oh, Paula, you're on mute.
There we go. I'm back. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think following on from what Ian just said, you know, but perhaps a slightly different angle. I think, you know, it's useful to consider the notion of the regulatory environment as well in the context of standards. So I think government has a part to play here in terms of giving the right guidance and giving people the kind of scope of a framework that they can operate within. And I think where government can really make a difference here is if they do that well and work closely with industry, then we can develop a set of standards to which we're not only necessarily comfortable with that security, but we're also comfortable that industry is going to want to play a part because they've been involved in that you know, that process of development. So yeah, I think standards are essential going forward, and I think the government has the most important part to play here.
Thank you. And Evan?
Yeah, I probably slightly duplication of what Paul has said there. I think government definitely needs to lead the way, because that's realistically how the sort of change gets enforced through regulation. You know, to say that, you know, industry X needs to adopt Y, for example. The only thing I would say and probably add to it, I think, is if it could go down that route, which I think it would benefit the whole industry as a general, so whether it's transportation, healthcare, and so forth. Once you start to kind of almost rigidize, and I'm not saying that's the best way of doing it, but once you start to rigidize the security standards and frameworks that are used in a particular industry, you then kind of build up a matrix of like kind of mapping across that as well. You know, so you look at things like NIST, for example, and you look at ISO 27001, there's so many sort of commonalities that map from one another. And it's quite useful if you know that, but it's still a difficult task to do. But I think from an industry perspective, if we can build that kind of, these are the standards that we use for automation, so automotive, these are the standards we use for railway, for example, there'll be common synergies there. And I think that's where it will enhance the awareness in the future, because you can build sort of common sets that will, you know, be widely adopted from the industry. But again, very much government led, I think.
But what it's interesting for me though, because, you know, as if you're a tier 1 organization, your suppliers, yeah, I'd like to think that there'll be certain levels or standards that they'll have to achieve now, because let's face it, the threats now don't only hit you as a company, they'll work, the attackers will hit your supply chain. Door is an interesting thing at the moment when we're talking about resiliency of organizations and what have you, which can have an impact. That's mainly in the financial sector, but there are things on the way.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, so I think now over to the floor. We've got a few questions coming in. I think the mix of AI and mitigation and attacks and so on has become interesting to our attendees. I'll direct the first one to Paula. It says, how is AI going to impact IoT cybersecurity threat generation?
Well, I think one of the things that, I mean, let's start by saying that AI is definitely a technology that's in its very, very early infancy. So, you know, there's a lot of change to come, and it's hard actually to predict and look forward and see. People talk about the event horizon of AI. It's about 2 years out, and we don't know what it's going to even be like.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I'm seeing down the line is the notion of an AI that doesn't need to speak to the internet. It's not like Alexa. It's more like a self-contained entity that can have the LLM capability, but doesn't necessarily need a network connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be a really useful tool in the world of industrial cyber, where we're talking about things that need to be isolated from other networks and definitely from the internet. And in that sense, I think we're going to use it perhaps for things like anomaly detection. You know, that's the simple base case for AI in any situation. Now we have to start to wonder, how do we intelligently apply the principles of anomaly detection to create useful results? And you know, I think we get back to this whole thing about behavior on the network. We can look at network traffic patterns. We can see systems that are operating slightly out of kilter, and these are certain really useful indicators that humans can use that they wouldn't normally pick up on by themselves. So for me, I think that's it. I mean, I don't want to go on too long. I'm so enthusiastic about AI and what I think is coming.
Mm-hmm.
I could talk for ages, and that's probably not what we want here. But I think pattern detection leading to an interesting and useful early intervention in cyber. That's what I would say is the primary for me.
Very interesting, thank you. And one question for Ian: does IBM have any products which have AI-based detection or mitigation?
We do, yeah. We've got a whole suite of products, as you'd expect. And you know, touching on what Paula mentioned there as well, we also offer air-gapped on-premise AI solutions as well now that don't need cloud access. But we offer a full zero trust suite of products, and we can even introduce AI as well to kind of analyze code, lots of things. The list is endless, to be honest. It's a big suite of products.
Yeah, great. So we have a question here from Jeremy. Does the panel have any comments on the differences between OT and IT professionals' perceptions of cybersecurity? And maybe start with you, Evan.
Yeah. How do I go about answering this one? Yeah, I think there's definitely a perception, and in the sense that OT systems tend to be more kind of, I'd mentioned about operational sort of uptime and safety critical. You know, they tend to be the key factors in the OT domain. And again, you tend to have an aging population of assets as well. So you don't necessarily have kind of, you know, the modern tech stack to kind of do all this kind of nice fancy protection kind of based aspects as well. So yeah, I'd say the difference is that OT is very much led by, you know, those kind of core factors, which is about uptime and safety, which weighs into the equation of actually, yeah, I've got a security risk with my PLC or my RTU, for example, but at the same time, you know, this is powering a plant, for example, that, you know, has to be up for 364 days a year. So, you know, we're going to drop in on Christmas Day and do an update or something like that. You know, the factor there is quite different, whereas compared to sort of traditional IT, you know, for example, in cloud, for example, you can do hundreds of deployments a day in a productionized environment that's serving millions of transactions for payment processing, for example, and you can do an update. And we've got that capability there because the kind of cloud infrastructure and the DevOps practices are sort of built in such a way that allows us to facilitate that, or we can canary robin the kind of, you know, route of traffic and just switch things over seamlessly. So you've definitely got this kind of very sort of fast transition of modernization for security in the cloud and IT systems, which you don't necessarily have you don't have that luxury from the OT perspective. So the approach is very much different in that sense. And I always argue that there's kind of this, I don't know, 20-30 year gap between where IT security is compared to OT security. It's not to say that the individuals that work in it are that far behind. It's nothing to do with that at all. It's just more the fact that we're having to deal with kind of education of a lot of industry that's only just starting to really adopt cybersecurity in the OT domain. So that's definitely a factor in the difference, or at least the perceptions from my view anyway.
Thank you. Lots of nodding heads there. And in the interests of time, I'll not ask the others, but Renuka, you have a question, I believe. You're on mute. And after this, I'm handing over
yes,
to
thank you very
Jeremy.
much. I wanted, like, I'm developing communities carbon calculator, especially in agriculture and farming industry. And so I wanted to know how IoT can help farming industry, especially because we are now having a high pressure on agriculture and farming industry due to, food security, as well as bioproducts and others are bringing pressure on agriculture. So, and there's a huge data, but how we can inspire or motivate or maybe make farmers or people who are working on ground literate about these things, how blockchain can help, how digital, IoT, because I'm novice in this, of course, but who can help from here? We have these huge number of people here who are experts, and have they played a role in agriculture? Is there anything that you can direct me? So that is my question.
Thank you. I think over to Ian, because I know IBM have been working in the agri sector.
Well, I'll be honest, I've been working on a agricultural project called Sequel for the last 3 years, which looks at improving trust in what we eat, reducing food waste, and that requires a lot of digitalization. There's a lot of layers in the supply chains for food, as you know, and it's very complicated in that sometimes we're coming from different areas of the world where technologies are not so great as in other developed parts of the world. And also the environment as well. When you look at meat production or even produce production, some of the environments where you're wanting to collect data using RFID tags and stuff, that could be quite extreme, and they're not best suited to devices. We managed to solve it in the Sequel project, but if you want to talk to me about that separately, Renuka, then please do. I'd be happy to talk about that.
Marvelous, thank
sure.
you.
If you can give me your email address, I can send you something and then we can talk. Thank you. Also, the last bit here, someone has mentioned about the government needs help from experts and so on. I was just now engaged with Technology Executive Committee of UN, and I found that there is a void, like a huge gap of representation from UK. And so probably we must definitely have something as an expert group from UK and represent our views at UN level as well.
Marvelous. Thank you for that. Thank you. So in the interest of time, thank you, panelists. We could have talked all day, I think, in truth. But we're 5 minutes towards the end of our session time. So at this point, I think I'd like to thank you, but hand over to Jeremy. Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Julie, for a really expert chairing of the sessions, which have been really very interesting. I wanted to reflect briefly on the value of those industry sector workshops, which Gideon and Rajab have been so effective in organising. Those 7 workshops have really brought together communities with enduring value, I think. And we've started to see through the synthesis work the cross-cutting challenges and how we can connect those communities to learn more from each other. And reflecting on the general impact of PETRAS, now we've been running in the 2 phases all the way through from 2016 to 2023. And we've got over 150 projects have been running, over 400 plus publications, a number of events. We've got a really effective community of both in the public sector, the private sector and the academic across 23 universities, which has really seeded, if you like, an ongoing conversation and co-production, co-creation, which I'll talk a little bit more about in terms of the way we will hopefully be going in the future. I think this panel has really unearthed some interesting points, some commonalities, which I found really interesting. I've made some notes. One of the points was really, and Paula talked from the BP point of view, one of the questions I kind of had, I weren't expected to answer it now because it's my wrap-up time, but it's about protecting intellectual property, for example, formulation of products. So it's actually about data and information leakage as much as about perturbation of, say, plant. So that's something we all need to be very, very aware about. An area that I've been personally interested in is the legacy system challenge for operational technologies, and how we can perhaps use local and isolated AI to do that. I think there are other comments about emerging threat landscapes that are really, if you like, coloured by AI, both as an attack means, but also as a protection means. And Ian mentioned the desire to connect everything. This is kind of ubiquitous and really goes ahead in the commercial sector without really thinking necessarily of the consequences, I think. So we need to really take a systems view across sectors and across supply chains. And we need to be mindful of cascade failures and interdependencies of systems that increasingly depend on each other. One takes, for example, the GPS system as a provider of timing, for example, for so many applications. We're so dependent on that. Do we really understand all those interdependencies? I was fascinated by the comment of the 20 to 30 year gap between OT and IT response in my question. I think there is a big cultural difference. I think OT people are very much focused on outcomes and service level contract maintenance, and that's quite proper. But increasingly there needs to be more diffusion, really, of, if you like, cyber hygiene, I think, into that world. I was interested in the ransomware and phishing protection through AI. I was interested also in IoT device security in industry. I think it might have been Paula who mentioned that, and the tendency and the temptation to use commercial off-the-shelf devices without properly validating them or understanding the supply chains for them. And that whole open source code piece, we could have talked a lot more about that, and the increasing trend towards standardizing around software bill of materials, which I think is something that the US has been kind of leading on. So a really rich discussion. Thank you so much to panelists for contributing and the questions that came forward. So moving towards the sort of conclusion of this, I think just to give you a hint about the future of PETRAS. So we're in an extension phase at the moment. The end of PETRAS was at the end of September. We'd already received a mandatory extension phase due to COVID, but EPSRC were very keen that we maximise the impact that we were able to generate. And Innovate UK, with their Securing Digital Technologies at the Periphery programme, have added the same amount of money as we had underspent in the EPSRC pot. So we're now planning a number of impact acceleration activities, which will lead us towards, at the end of June 2024, the movement perhaps into a new phase. And I can give you a few hints around that. So we've had some very strong interest from the defence and security world, not to move away from our civil interests and applications, but to improve the learning between the sectors, so we get a more holistic view. And there is some money in the pot we're hoping to bid for in that area. So watch this space, and we'll keep you posted. And that leads me into just a bit of a plug for the summit event. So we've got a really interesting and high visibility event on the 21st of February 2024, which we're holding at County Hall, London, which is called We Are Connected, Are We Protected? And I think Sarah's going to put a link to that in the chat. And that's primarily a public awareness event, but also for parliamentarians. So we've got picked for the all-party parliamentary group, bringing a number of parliamentarians in. We're going to really talk in depth about privacy and security, so about citizen privacy with the devices in your home, but also about the impacts on security. So looking at the time, slightly overrun, apologies. I'd just like to thank you all very much again, particularly the organisers, so Rajab and Gideon and the PETRAS Centre team, Sarah, and last but absolutely not least, Julie, for a magnificent bit of chairing there. Thanks. Let's stay in touch.